All right, it's 5:30 and I'm getting us all set up on Zoom. I'm sorry, on YouTube. So as soon as that gets going, as soon as that stream is set, I'll get us going. There we go. Great. Well, welcome everyone to the January 2021 ATC meeting. Welcome to the new members. We do have one attendee. Looks like a couple more attendees coming in now. And so for this first part of the meeting, I just want to go over a couple logistical pieces, a reminder for everyone to keep themselves on mute unless they're speaking. And attendees, if you want to make a public comment, there will be time at the beginning of the meeting here, and you can raise your hand and I will bring you in. We will have time to do introductions on the agenda today. And as I hand this over to today's chair coordinator, who is Daniel, I'll bring up the agenda as well. So just a reminder, if you're an attendee and you want to make a comment, raise your hand. I'll bring you on to make a 3-minute comment and then pull you back into the attendee group. We ask that you keep your comments concise, and sometimes if there's time on the agenda, we will be able to respond, but sometimes we will need to gather those comments, hear back from ATC, and see if we need to make some information from staff gathered and then share information at the next meeting. I am Shane, and I'm going to be running the back end pieces. So once I hand this over, it'll be Daniel and Lee who will be coordinating most of the parts of this meeting. So Daniel, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll put up the agenda just so everyone sees that for a little bit.
Great. So we're going to start if there's any comments from the public. And
it looks like we do have Duncan, so I'm going to bring Duncan on now.
Am I on?
You're on, Duncan.
Okay. Yeah, there's been a lot of emails floating back and forth today about people zooming around on the bike path. And I wanted to ask whether the city might consider establishing a speed limit on the shared youth pass, and maybe have the cops on the bicycles enforce it. That's it.
Great. Is there anyone else who has a public comment? If you're in the attendee area, you can raise your hand. Okay, doesn't look like.
Great. So then we can move to the next item, approving notes from the December 10th meeting. Did anybody not get a chance to look at those? Any comments about that? Okay, then a motion to approve.
Yeah, I'll move we approve the minutes as distributed.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Okay, do we have any opposed? All right. Looks like that passes. So The next item is committee member introductions. And this is the committee chair. So I guess that's me tonight. Actually, one note, Grace, I never heard back from you. Are we good swapping off?
Yeah, that works for me. I must
Okay.
have missed your email, but we can coordinate.
Yeah,
I'm happy
sorry,
to swap.
we'll check on that later. I just wanted to make sure we were all good. So yeah, maybe we can start with introducing ourselves. Maybe we can start with members of the committee from this last year, who you are, and something about yourself, maybe what brought you here to the committee, or maybe what is bringing you here tonight. What is really exciting you to be here, or just some history about yourself. I can go ahead and start. So my name is Daniel Wilson. So this is my second year on the committee, and I'm here mostly because I have young children, and this has become much more relevant to me. Transportation issues have been, forefront in my mind because my children live so close to a park just across the street, and yet they can't get there themselves, which seems just about the saddest thing. And so I'd like to see more people be able to use their bodies and move around regardless of their age or ability. And let's see, can we do this? Can we do this popcorn style? Somebody else from last year.
I'll go next since I'll be sharing the co-chairing position with Daniel. So my name is Grace Kaplowitz. I use she, her pronouns. And I think I'm here because I'm interested in seeing how government works and how we can be involved in things that we care about and make a difference in our community. I just graduated from the U of O in the spring with a degree in planning, public policy, and management. So I studied transportation and planning issues, and I'm really interested in them. And working in local government through an AmeriCorps program with the city of Oak Ridge as well. So kind of looking at how can I be an effective agent of change from many different angles. And I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight.
I guess I will go. I'm Josh Kaczynski, he, him, and I have been attending active transportation committee meetings for 6 or 7 years now. I've been on the committee for 2 years, 2.5. And I work at the University of Oregon as the active transportation coordinator, but I'd be here even if it wasn't my day job, because I find the whole topic fascinating, and there's a lot to learn in this room, not just from staff, but from other folks on the committee. So I'm happy to see new faces.
I'll go next. My name's Pete Knox. I live downtown, and I'm probably one of the few people who are not a bicyclist. I'm a pedestrian and bus rider. So I'm very interested in how the transportation works for things that are not cars. And I'm very happy to see our new panelists here. Thank you.
I'll jump in. I'm Steve Abbott. I'm starting my second year on the committee, and this second year of still experiencing the strange sensation of interacting virtually, but starting to get used to it. I retired a while ago from a long career of construction and design and civil engineering and et cetera, and city planning, and became an avid biker, walker, and climate activist. So that's kind of how I'm in all this intersection of those things kind of brought me here trying to make a difference.
I can go. Hi, I'm Andrea Plesnarski, and I moved to Eugene a couple of years ago from a much larger city. And one of the things I really wanted in living in Eugene was living somewhere where I could walk and bike to shopping and not have to get into my car, because I was really tired of living somewhere where I had to be in my car all the time. So I was very excited to hear about this committee when I first moved here, and get to, as a citizen, have some input into what happens with, pedestrian and any sort of bike infrastructure. So yeah, it's a great opportunity, and welcome everybody. Really great to see all these new faces.
I'll go. So I'm Julie Daniel, and I grew up in, this is my second year, like Steve, on the committee, and most of our year has been virtual like this, which is kind of odd. I grew up in Europe where busing and walking and biking were just a way of life. And so the whole car culture is a little bit newer to me. And I come to it from a background in nonprofit management and an environmental nonprofit here in town, and have been a long time cyclist here. And I think my main interest in coming here was how few of my peers, which are, getting much older women, will actually ride bikes on the streets because they feel unsafe and don't want to share, they're horrified that I ride all year round and at night, and just think it's like the most dangerous thing that a person could possibly do. So I'm here to learn how to, increase bike riding or advocate for bike riding for older people, because we have the time and oftentimes more resources to be able to buy a bike and all the gear that it takes to really be a good cyclist. And I'm very happy to see all these new faces.
I'm Alan Hancock. I use he and him, his pronouns. And I've been on the ATC a couple of times now, so a number of years. And I've been involved with bicycle advocacy ever since I was a teenager. I've been bicycling for a really long time and have always seen the benefits of bicycling as well as walking, and have been engaged in a lot of community issues here, and particularly issues related to connectivity, connecting our river path, for example, with other routes within the city. And I'm also a big proponent of good urban design to help make Eugene a livable walking community.
I think that's everybody from last year. Am I missing anyone? Yeah, so could I invite our new committee members to introduce themselves?
I'll jump in. My name is Hillary Mankowski, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the city court of the Bethel School District. And so I am here to represent Bethel and also the West Side. I live near Churchill High School, and I love bikes. I love biking. I have a cargo bike that I like to put my 2 kids on and ride around town. And I would love Eugene to be a city, it's kind of my dream, where it's easier to use shared transportation or active transportation to get where you're going instead of a single occupancy vehicle. So that's just my dream. I'm just going to put it out there.
I guess I can go next. I'm Sue Walling. I'm about to retire as an RN in the ICU at Riverbend. And I guess I just find that active transportation is a big chunk of the answer to nearly any problem in Eugene that you can name, whether it's, climate change or land use or economics or equity. I mean, I think there's a transportation component to just about everything. And I could find you a bicycle solution to just about any problem you can name. I'm probably the world's worst bike advocate because I've been doing this for 35 years, and yet the percentage of trips made by bike is lower now, I think, than it was when I started. So I'm hoping that with a whole new generation of new energy, new ideas, that we can do better. I'm excited about the chance to try.
I'll jump in. I'm Anne Brown, she, her. I'm a faculty at the U of O. And I know a bunch of you from that realm, so it's good to be with you. I'm excited for this committee. So I do research in equity and shared mobility and travel behavior primarily, but I'm excited about the chance to actually do something instead of doing research all day and hopefully affecting change here locally. And one of my motivations for why now was kind of like Daniel's, is I have a 17-month-old, and right now he's on the back of my bike, but I'm really looking forward to the day that I can let him walk or bike and use his own human power to get around safely. So that's my goal. So somewhat short term, but long term as well.
I guess I'll go. My name is Josh Mendez. I'm a faculty/researcher at U of O. I come from Atlanta, a somewhat larger city. And over there, it's sort of, you had the transportation people on one side from the city and the advocates on the other side, and they'd get together sometimes and yell at each other and nothing would happen. So it's great to have a venue here where, community and the city can integrate and talk about issues facing the city regarding active transportation. I'm also an avid bike mechanic. I believe in empowering people in bike mechanics and fixing your own bike. And I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Papa Awori. I'm originally from Nairobi, Kenya. I've lived in Eugene for 22 years. And I'm an avid cyclist, both recreational and for exercise, but also have a vehicle. But my interest in joining this committee was more in terms of safety factor for cyclists and pedestrians. And I remember about 2 years ago, I was on the bicycle path heading to West Eugene, and I was about to cross Polk Street, and there was a mother with 3 kids. She had crossed on the other side with her 2 kids on small bicycles, and 1 kid was left on one side. And although there was a zebra crossing there, pedestrian crossing, vehicles were not stopping. I got so mad that I went in the middle of the road to stop the cars. So when I heard of this committee, I figured it's something that I could contribute to in terms of trying to bring more bike safety. And that's my main interest in being in the committee. And of course, I'd like to have the same dream as Hillary, that there be a bicycle paths all over Eugene that we can use in the future.
Yeah, I can go next. So my name is Andrew Martin. I actually am a planner LTD, and I got into active transportation. I'd grown up in a super car dependent lifestyle. And then when I was 18, I left my parents' house, and I didn't have access to a car until about 2 years ago when I moved in with my partner. So I lived most of my adult life without regular access to a car. And I realized how much it changed my life in a really positive way, actually, just not even having that as an option. And so that's what led me into transportation planning. And I used to volunteer a lot with the Bicycle Coalition when I lived in Philadelphia. And I moved out here and went to school at U of O. And now I work at LTD, and I get to do a lot of cool things in the transportation world professionally. But it's been a while since I've gotten to do kind of personal advocacy, particularly around bikes, which is how I choose to get around most of the time. But also a huge fan of walking, transit, scooters, whatever you're doing that's not driving a car by yourself. I'm even into carpooling. So really just excited to do some personal advocacy work. It's been a while.
I can go. I'm Mary Christensen, and I've been in Eugene for about 30 years. I think I moved to Eugene right before Ruth Bascom was mayor, the bicycling mayor. And I thought she was very inspirational, and I thought that's what Eugene was. And it kind of is, but I don't think we've reached our potential. I think that I thought we were on this trajectory like, whoa, and instead it feels a little more like this. So I've always been interested. We've been with about 25 years in our family, my 3 kids and my partner and I. And we just think that's a really great, healthy lifestyle. We think it makes for more livability and more livable place. And I'm a climate activist as well. And also social equity. I just think it's just hits so many things. It makes a ton of sense. And so I've been very interested in it all along. And I really also like the work that the city of Eugene has done. And I think that the people who work in transportation, I think they do a really good job. And I like that they ride their bikes and that they're mission focused. So I feel like we've got so much potential, and I'm just really interested to see what else we can do to get Eugene to kind of come along here.
All right, I think that was everyone. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. It's really nice to meet you all. Even before the pandemic, I felt so kind of isolated, feeling like this was everything, like I was the only one that cared about this stuff. So it's just so delightful to meet everyone and be in this space. Looks like Lee has a hand.
Hey, Daniel, I thought maybe it'd be a good opportunity for staff to introduce themselves as well. But I can start since I'm talking now.
Absolutely.
I'm the main liaison to the Active Transportation Committee. I've been working for the City of Eugene for 16 years in transportation planning, and most of the time as a liaison to ATC. But I've also been a transportation planner at Lane Council of Governments and as parking manager for the city of Corvallis. And then I came from California 30 years ago where I was a transit planner. And I guess that's it about me.
I will go. Hi, folks. My name is Reed Dunbar, and if you haven't met me, I'm either the cause of or solution to a lot of the bicycling and walking problems you're experiencing every day. I'm the lead planner for walking and biking in the city and work with Lee and Shane and other staff to try to make things better. I use this committee as a sounding board. So when we have projects that we're trying to develop, when we have policies that we think will be effective, if we've got opportunities to engage with folks, we like to test it with a committee of citizens that represent a variety of active transportation interests and come from a variety of different neighborhoods throughout the city. And so one of the benefits of this panel, and I'm really proud that we got so many of you on the Active Transportation Committee, is that you come from all over Eugene. And I'm really excited about that because sometimes we won't have anybody from certain neighborhoods, and we'll be thinking about solutions to problems that we're not real sure of because nobody's out there experiencing them every day. So this is a nice starting point for us. What I'd also like this committee to be is for this to be a starting point for you to grow in your advocacy efforts and grow in your capability to understand what city department can respond to an issue that you're experiencing. You have a liaison in Lee as a main point of contact where he might be able to link you up with folks you would like to have a conversation with as well. And then the committee overall can of course debate a variety of issues, and we can invite folks in. So then when there are big issues like leaf collection, for example, which used to be a problem in Eugene because all the leaves would end up in the bike lanes and then the bike lanes weren't being swept. That's one example of a project that started here in committee and then actually moved into our public works department. So those sorts of things where we can convene staff and have them talk directly to the community, I think is really powerful because we're getting firsthand testimony from folks who are having the issue and are able to tell their story and why it matters. So I'm glad to see you all. I will probably talk again later in the agenda. I'll turn it over to Shane.
Thanks, Reed. Yeah, so I'm Shane Rhodes, and I am the Transportation Options Coordinator with the City of Eugene. And so I work with the team, and actually next meeting, we hope to have most of the team on as a potential agenda item so you can meet who all in the transportation team we are. We're a bigger team than we were even just last year. And so my work is primarily focused on programs. So hold on. Is mostly working on programs. So our active transportation strategic plan and all the pieces that fall under that. So Sunday Streets, Smart Trips, any of the programmatic pieces that we do. I've been with the city for a few years now, and have been permanent for a year. And before I started working for the city, I worked for 9 years on Safe Routes to School. So I worked for 4J as the Safe Routes to School coordinator. So I'm really glad to have so many other family bikers and people who have a lens from not just the recreational side, but real transportation, cycling on here, as well as just the diversity of people we have of walking, transit, different parts of town. So I'm excited for that, for all the new members. My passion is definitely centered around programs, but then also infrastructure. And so I work closely with Reed as well on what those infrastructure changes are that he's working on and how we can best communicate those out, especially we're at a really exciting time. It feels like for the last 5 years, 10 years, we've really been making this shift and this work in the planning side to get us to where we are right now. And I feel like we're at this exciting tipping point where we're putting in some really big projects that we've talked about for many years. We went through a bicycle pedestrian master plan, and that got integrated into our transportation system plan. And that got into our budget pieces and our grant requests. And now we have those projects hitting the ground, and those include the 13th Avenue two-way protected bikeway. Next year, the High Street protected bikeway, 8th Avenue protected bikeway, linking our amazing shared use path system with a on-street protected bike network. We have some really exciting crossings and sidewalk infill program pieces that are stirring a lot more than they have been in years past. And so it's a really exciting time. And, the work that I do will be working with you to talk about how do we get people to utilize those facilities that we're building. We're taking this new tipping point and we want to take this change, the second bike boom that we're in, and have it have the best impact we can on our community to reach our goals as a city of our climate reduction goals and our mode shift goals. And you are the community sounding board that will help us determine what we as staff can do to reach those goals. So I so appreciate your time to be on this committee and look forward to working together to figure out how we can work together to reach those goals.
So we're a little ahead of schedule, and I noticed that there isn't on the agenda anything. I thought it might be a good idea to take a minute if anyone has any questions about how things work. Maybe somebody who's been on the committee a little longer than me and not in such a strange year can tell us a little bit about how the process goes here, what meetings look like, and then just if anyone has any questions before we dive into the next agenda item.
I have a question. It's got to do with cycling on the streets. When I go to work, I use High Street, and I noticed the new bike lights over there on 13th. Now, I notice sometimes they're a little turn green and it let me through. But then there are other times when it's green for the vehicles, but it's red on the cycle path. So I'm confused.
Reed, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I generally take notes for the meeting. So if you see me typing feverishly, it's because that's what I'm doing. So the 13th Avenue Bikeway is a work in progress. So let me start out there. So for folks who say it's difficult to get through the corridor because they have to stop at all the red lights, yes, we know. There are communication devices that are going to go on each of those signals that can forecast if somebody is coming. We just got those, and we're currently sort of trying to get them to coordinate. On the side streets, so like on High Street and on Pearl Street, there are separate phases for all users. So people on bikes get a phase that is separate from people driving cars. And that is the same as 13th Avenue. And what that does is it separates the modes so that they're not entering the intersection at the same time and creating conflicts. So it's very deliberate, Papa, that on High Street, that high cars get a separate signal, because what you're supposed to do on High Street is, say if you're going to campus, when you have the green light, nobody else is moving. So you can go ahead and turn right from the bike lane or left from the bike lane, because you're the only signal phase that's operating at that moment. There are overhead cameras that detect you, and it varies by intersection, but overall there are overhead cameras that detect where you are, and then that places a call for a signal. Sometimes what happens, and Shane and I are working with our traffic folks on this, is that it feels like you get to the intersection at the same time as a car or a little bit before a car, and then they get the green signal before you get the green signal. And why does that happen that way? And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that anytime there's a bike there, they'll get a green signal phase. So hopefully it comes at the beginning of traffic, and if people come in late, it come at the end of traffic. And we're still working with them on coordinating that. So a lot of this is computer programming. And it's interesting because the big controller boxes that are there, you open them up and there's just like a laptop inside. So you open up the laptop and you start kind of figuring out what the heck's going on and what the camera's seeing. And you can actually watch people sort of come into the zone that the camera finds, and then how it reacts to that. So some of this is almost like software that we need to fine tune. Some of it is the way that we designed that corridor. And I think Sue will be happy to hear that we've learned a lot of lessons on 13th Avenue, and on High Street, we're probably going to do things a little bit differently. But that 13th is an ongoing thing, and we're still trying to learn our lessons. But that if you have a red bike signal, you should stop, because other traffic is not stopping. And if you have a crash, that is your crash, regardless, because you have gone through a red light. So green phases for cars means red phases for bikes, usually, except for at Hilliard. And a green phase for a bike means a red phase for a car, usually along the entire corridor. And again, that allows people to do the movements that they need to do without conflicting. And that is specifically because we have a contraflow bike lane. So with that two-way bike lane, we've got all traffic that used to move one way. We've introduced one mode, which is a vulnerable bicycling mode, coming contraflow. And so we were trying to figure out how to stop traffic so that that was still a safe way to move traffic. And we're still working on it. So hopefully that gets a little bit better, it gets more responsive, it starts to make more sense. But please follow the signal. The signals are definitely finding you, and they will definitely get a green eventually. I've tested this out many times. I know Shane takes his family out there too, and we test it and we say, okay, is it working now? I haven't caught it not working, so it will work. You will eventually get a green. And if you do not get a green, you can always call 682-4800. So that is a direct line to our maintenance department. And then that goes for leaves in the street, or a stick down, or a dead animal in the bike lane, or you see a stop sign that's pulled over, or there's an overhead light on the shared use path that's burnt out. 682-4800, and then you can report that. And then if you say, I would like a response, we'll get back to you about when we're going to fix it, and then they'll go out and make the change. But 13th, we're still working on.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question, a procedural question. Is that okay? I was just wondering how, when there's public comment such as Duncan's, how is that sorted or processed? Is it just recorded? Does somebody get back to people? Does it get added to an agenda? What's the process for that?
Hi, this is Lee. I'll respond. So we take notes, and then public comment session, then I make a file that has all the public comments at the meeting. Some things we can respond right away. And some things I might have to talk to some other people about it, what the response might be. And then we would put it back in the meeting notes, and we can bring it up at the next meeting too. So we'll work on that response. And I will share that file with the committee. Every time I put something in there to make sure you can make sure that we get back to the public.
And I'll note that when there is time on the agenda, there sometimes can be, some clarifications or questions on the public comments. That's dependent on the chair and sort of how the ATC wants to handle that. Sometimes it's just a public comment and then we move on, and other times there's some clarifying questions or a bit of discussion. And as I called out in the chat as well, with this online world, we do have the chat open currently, and you're welcome to do some interaction there as well, and we capture that chat into the notes now as well.
Yeah, and if you want a preview of what the response is going to be to Duncan, I've already typed it. Here's what it is. So Duncan asked that there's been a lot of emails about people zooming on the bike path. Would the city consider establishing speed limit on shared use paths? And we've been talking about this for a very long time. And one of the issues that we come down to is enforcement. We don't have folks, enforcement officers out on the shared use path who are enforcing speed limits. The folks that we have out on the shared use paths are park ambassadors, and they're helping people who need a little help, mostly the unhoused folks who could use some assistance, and we try to get them the help that they need. Folks who are lost, you can see those people anytime. They have the green shirts on, they say park ambassadors on them, and you can ask like where the next bridge is and anything like that. But their role is really as an ambassador. You can also tell them if you see an encampment somewhere and you're sort of worried about that condition, and they can go check that out, but they don't do enforcement or speed enforcement. And so one of the issues is, where do you post the speed limits? Do you assemble signs? Do you paint markings on the path? A lot of people on their bikes don't have speedometers, so they don't know how fast they're going. So how are we supposed to enforce that? And then there's the people who are actually going to issue the enforcement, and then what happens there. And enforcement overall, I think, especially this year, has become sort of a problem because some folks are stopped more than other folks are. And how do we do that equitably? And so there are a myriad of problems. And so what we're going to do as a response to this, and this continues to be a problem, and Shane can speak to this a little bit, is we'd like to focus on a path etiquette campaign that talks about what you should be doing on the shared use path. And that includes operating at a safe speed. And folks can decide what that means. But I mean, personally, I have no problem yelling at somebody who's doing interval training on the shared use path. Don't do that there. The shared use path is a shared space where everybody should feel safe. There are users on the path who are unpredictable. People walking dogs, animals tend to be unpredictable. Children are looking at things and tend to scurry across paths. And so we should all be operating in a way where we can stop or react to other users on the path. And once we establish that mindset, and we can do that through reinforcing signs, Springfield has started to do that. If you ride into Springfield, you'll see some of their signs talk about riding single file. Making an audible noise when you're going to pass somebody so that folks know that you're coming, always operating on the right side of the path. There's lots of that type of messaging that we would like to lead with before we get to an enforcement type effort.
So then just real quick, just in case, just for those of you who are new, 1 minute version. If you would like to talk, feel free to jump in at an appropriate time. If things are the conversation is kind of slow, if things are a little faster paced, you can raise your hand at the bottom of your screen there. And then if there's a lot of folks, whoever's facilitating will transition to keeping stack and keeping track of who's talking next. At various points, we'll make decisions, and then you can thumbs up if you agree to move forward with the proposal, or thumbs down, in which case you would block it. So we're operating on a consensus model, and we would try and get to a point where everyone is either agreeing or standing aside. If you stand aside, we would probably ask that you speak to why you don't want to go forward, but you're not actually blocking it. And then if there are enough people standing aside, we would reconsider. Anything else before we go to the next item? Okay, so our next agenda item is the upcoming Regional Transportation System Plan update, and it looks like we have Ellen Courier and Sid Schoaf.
Hi, I'm Ellen Courier. I'm a transportation planner with Lane Council of Governments. Is it okay? I can share my screen, right, Shane?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. I will do that while Sid introduces himself.
Hello, my name is Sid Schoaf. I'm a transportation planner with Lane Council of Governments.
Did that work? It always looks really odd on my end when I share my screen. So let me just pull up this PowerPoint presentation. So I am going to do just a quick overview of what a metropolitan planning organization is. I know there's some new folks on the committee. We typically come to present to this committee once or twice a year. And as I go through this, I'll mention some of the other topics that we talk on. The plan that I'm going to talk about is something that we update every 4 years. So this is a little bit outside of our normal schedule, but we do usually come to this committee and do a presentation. So metropolitan planning organizations are policy and planning representatives. They're made up of your elected officials and your staff at the City of Eugene, City of Springfield, and City of Coburg. It's a cooperative decision-making, so we try to work with stakeholders from not just the cities, but from economic development, from travel, businesses, and we really are trying to build consensus. MPOs exist all over the country, anywhere that there's a census urbanized area of 50,000 or more. We're actually in a transportation management area because we're 200,000 population and above, and there's a couple of extra things that happen with that, but it's not too different. And then there is a policy committee that makes decisions for us. We are housed at Lane Council of Governments. And there's lots of different flexibilities in MPOs around the country. A lot of them are at COGS. There are some that operate a little bit differently. You may be familiar with Metro up in Portland. They're slightly different than some of the ones that are at Council of Governments. They work both with Federal Highways and Federal Transit Administration. So we have funding from both of those federal agencies. And most of the work is done by staff that are LCOG staff, but we do have consultants. We have a consultant working on the long range plan that I'll be talking about later. So here's just an example of where they are. They're all over the country. Even though they're not super well known as a government agency, they are an important part of transportation planning all over the country. Here are the MPOs that exist in Oregon. That we have a couple of that cross boundaries, and I think maybe just one or two that cross boundaries with Washington. I think Longview is one that they have to work with both states, so that's kind of interesting. And here's just a map of our MPO area. So our partner agencies are Eugene, Springfield, Coburg, ODOT, Lane County, Lane Transit District, and we all work together on a regular basis to do this regional planning work. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the history of why the federal government is involved with transportation planning. It started kind of as a result of the Interstate Highway Act in 1956. At that time, there was no such thing as an MPO, and folks, the federal government came in and put highways kind of up wherever they wanted to. There was predictably a lot of backlash to that, and so enough that Congress was had to do something about it. And so it kind of evolved over time. In the 60s, they started kind of coming up with this concept of the 3 C's, which is continuing, comprehensive, and cooperative. And that's kind of a foundational principle that we work on with MPOs now. And it was really focused more on transit in the 60s, started to evolve more into what we see as a traditional MPO now in the 70s, and then strengthened again in the 1990s. So that's just a little history of why the federal government is actively involved in regional planning. This is a diagram that kind of talks about our structure a little bit more. So we do have 2 subcommittees, we have 3 subcommittees. Transportation options, which some of you are a part of. We work on with all of our partner agencies on our transportation options programs. The MPO does have a pretty robust transportation options program. It had been previously housed at Lane Transit District. We're kind of going through a big transition right now and looking at how to deliver those programs in the future. We have a transportation advisory subcommittee, which is made up of staff, and then it goes to the transportation planning committee, which makes actual recommendations to our policy board. The policy board is made up of elected officials from all of our agencies, elected and appointed officials from all of our agencies. This is just kind of an example of who is on there at any given time. And those are the folks that make up our planning committees. So there's kind of a lot of different programs that we work on as an MPO. The long range plan is what I'm going to talk to you about today. We do have programming and implementation, which is essentially our funding. So every 2 or 3 years, we actually take federal dollars and program those into our cities. So that's a large part of the work that we do, and you might call that kind of more of our current planning. Public participation, we do air quality planning, so we have to do analysis about some of the projects, particularly larger projects, to make sure that they're not contributing to air quality issues. We have a lot of technical work that happens at the MPO, so our transportation model that helps to inform projects at all of our agencies and our regional planning efforts. We've recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, done a lot of work around collecting data and putting data together in a more consumable way for the public, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And that is actually one of the more typical presentations that I do to this committee, is I'll bring some of our bike and pedestrian count data and talk about that. So if that's of interest to the group, I'll schedule that at another time. And then the big thing that we do is intergovernment coordination, is working with our partners to make sure that whatever federal dollars get programmed in our area are a priority for those partner agencies. So that's really the foundation of what the federal agencies want us to do, is make sure that we're collaborating and it's a cooperative and there is a consensus on how those dollars are spent. This diagram is showing kind of the distribution of where we spend our dollars. So about 65% of our dollars actually go directly to projects. So that's roadway projects, bike ped projects, transit projects. We do fund a lot of planning projects as well. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see kind of our ongoing projects. That's our core operational funds, and that includes our transportation options dollars, and our Safe Routes to School programs are also funded through our MPO. This is our data portal, and so I'll put a link to that in the chat if folks are interested. I encourage you all to check out what we have up there. We're trying to add to it as much as we can. And when we adopt this long range plan that I'm going to talk about, all of our performance measures will probably be housed at this data portal. So it's a good link, especially if folks are interested in biking and walking. There's some good information on here. So like I alluded to, our long range plan is something that we do every 4 years. We are trying to outline our goals and our priorities and look for opportunities to work together. We really, especially in this iteration of the plan, would like to expand who we talk to when we get information for this. I think this is always a challenge in planning, is you have the most active, engaged folks that are giving you information for your planning. So we're trying really hard to make sure that we're reaching out to underrepresented populations and make sure that we're hearing the voices of everybody. Look at ways that transportation can help increase access to housing and jobs in our community. Further integrate our transportation options and, of course, emerging technologies. I know that's a topic that everybody's trying to figure out how to incorporate into these long-range plans. And then support climate recovery and reduce our transportation related pollution. So we're about halfway through with our planning process. The bulk of the work that's happened so far is working with our modelers and doing some existing conditions work to really understand the conditions on the ground. We have done some draft goal making with our policy board, and if folks are interested, you can, all of that is posted on our website, or I can send that as a follow-up email. And right now we're doing a big push for our public outreach, which is the online open house. And it really is about trying to understand the needs of our community and not necessarily having them review plans. So when you visit the online open house, it hopefully will allow you provide information about how you use our transportation system, how you view it, and what you would like to see thinking about growth in our community over the next 20 years. So, you know, there are kind of like things that are urgently needed, of course, but then also thinking about, okay, well, we're going to see more people live here and we're going to have more constraints. So how are we going to accommodate those new people that are going to live here? And then I put a link in here to our Facebook and our Twitter. This is, I know we're a little behind the times, but we did get it this year. And we had previously had a kind of a separate, distinct, I don't really know what the techie term for is it, but it was like, we called it Lane Voices, and it was this own place where you could collaborate. But what we found was that nobody actually went there, shockingly, I know. So we finally moved away from that, and most of our online public outreach will go through Facebook and Twitter. This is some information that you'll see when you visit the online open house, just really talking about what our existing conditions are. I will say that this is limited to the census data, so this isn't directly out of our model. But that's what we're hoping to do, is have people reflect on not just their current needs of what they would like to see change, but really thinking about long-term, what would they like to see this transportation system look like? And then I will say that something new that we've done, and I think this is mostly result of COVID, is that we're doing a lot of direct mailing. And the way that we decided to do that was we do some equity analysis every time we do a plan, and in an ongoing manner. And what that does is basically let us know where our communities of concern are located. And I'll just, I think this will take me to our data portal. And this might be something that I know a couple of people mentioned equity as their interest. We do have some of this information on our data portal, but what we did was do direct mailing to the block groups that had the highest concentrations of something that we call our communities of concern. So those are our topical areas that we're most focused on: minority populations, households in poverty, elderly population, and people with disabilities. And so this factor down here basically says, well, 4 of those populations exist in the highest concentration in those block groups. So we're doing a direct mailer. That's what I'm going to do this weekend. I have a whole box of things to stamp and send to the mail. So I'm interested to see how this works. We haven't done it to this level in the past, and we're hopeful that we'll get more folks responding to our survey. It does have a link to the online open house, but it also has a condensed version of the survey that's translated in English and Spanish. So that'll be kind of a new thing that we haven't done in the past for our public outreach. There's our contact information, and I would love to chat with you all and just hear your thoughts about any questions or thoughts you have about MPOs or about the long range planning effort. Also, I'll just say it's really interesting. My kids are in the dining room. It's just interesting doing a presentation with your kids watching you.
Tough crowd.
They do.
I'll
They're
just
kind of
chime
like
more of a comment. So I fortunately get to work with LCOG on this. So I see kind of how it ends up coming out, and it seems like a super kind of dry plan at first when you start getting into it. But actually, the cool thing is that this really coordinates kind of our system between Coburg, Springfield, and Eugene, which is, I think, really helpful for people because they don't really care whose road or whose bike path they're on. They just want paths that work, right? Like I live in Eugene, I work in Springfield, so I need both to work well, and I need them to be connected. And also a ton of federal money gets allocated. I mean, not a ton, right? There's not that much, but quite a bit of our local discretionary money goes through grant applications, and those grant applications tie to this plan. So the goals and objectives we put in this plan are actually super important for how our kind of local agencies choose what they choose to apply for, and who ends up getting funding for a lot of, frankly, like a lot of our walking and biking projects are funded with that money because it's such a great source. So I think everybody should be super engaged in this process because it really does affect the work of this committee and also our local staff.
Sorry, I don't see a way to raise my hand electronically, so I'm raising it this way. A couple of questions. In the first place, what is the role of the Lane Act? I've heard of it, and I don't know where it fits into the whole picture. And then also, I was wondering, when you talk about we'll be posting performance measures and stuff, how current is your data? I know we've run into problems like with crashes, that we get data on crashes, but it's by the time we get it, it's like 4 years old already, or so how real time can that data be? Thanks.
Yeah. So the Lane Act is a committee of ODOT, and they are countywide. So we do have MPO representation on ACT. So one of our MPO staff participate on ACT, and we do work together in some sense, but it's a little bit different in that Lane Act is kind of advising on state level decisions more than the MPO is. I don't know if other staff want to jump in on that, if they had other ideas. And then it just depends on what data set you're looking at, the currency of what we have. That's something that we're always working on, trying to have more current data. And I would say, yes, I agree with you. The safety crash data is a major barrier to some of our safety work that we do. Census data is fairly current, although we do use the American Community Survey data for most of that. And as you know, that's fairly limited. I know somebody mentioned the people biking and walking going down over time, and it is true that I think generally our rates of commuting by biking and walking have gone down, but there are also pretty large margins of error in that ACS data. So just wanted to that's one of the limitations of using that data, is there is a fairly large margin of error, and so some of that stuff we're just not totally sure it's going down or it's going up. It could be the same because it's all kind of within that margin of error. And we try to do that as much as possible, show that information on our data portal. But yeah, that's one of the priorities that we have for this long range plan, is to make sure that we're building in systems so that whatever data or performance measures we decide to do we're actually going to be able to update them and keep that current as much as possible. So it is always a challenge, but I'm hopeful that we're moving in the right direction on that.
Alan, I'll follow up. Oh, sorry, Steve, you had your hand up.
Yeah, first, just Ellen said, thank you so much for coming and sharing this information with us. And I spent a little bit of time on the website or in the transplan in advance, and what an incredible treasure trove of information that I look forward to getting into deeper. But I guess maybe I was looking at an older, it looked like it was 2002 was the original draft. But looking at the trends and issues, one thing jumped out at me. It said that if the transplan provisions were successful, that it would, there were several measures that were expected to be achieved, like 8% less VMT per capita. How are those kind of measures trending? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, because I think we've had this discussion at our policy board of, some folks even questioning the VMT as a metric, especially as we see more electrification in our area. But, I don't know. I mean, I think this is something that staff struggle with all the time, is that we know for our, accommodating all of these new people that move here, we're going to have to reduce VMT because we don't have the ability to build out more roads to accommodate all of those. So I think at some point the constraints will get there, whether it's, before we get to extreme congestion or not, is kind of up to us as we decide to make our policies. And And one thing that I didn't mention, it will be part of this plan. It's kind of this whole other project on its own, but we're doing this strategic planning model that the state put together. And it does allow you to kind of test some of those policy levers that we always talk about when we want to, to try and accomplish some of these goals like VMT reduction. So it's like, pulling up on the parking costs or pulling up on parking availability and seeing how that impacts your ability to reach your goals on VMT. So that's a new tool that we've kind of brought in-house this year. And I know Eugene's used it on some of their climate action work too. And we're hopeful that that will help staff and committees and the public kind of better understand the decisions around some of this stuff. So if we do want to accomplish this, we don't want to live somewhere with lots of congestion or lots of pollution. Here's some of the things that we can do to try and accomplish those goals. It's a very simplified tool, but it at least helps you kind of conceptualize something and sort of see the impacts of like, okay, well, we're not just raising parking for no reason. We're raising parking costs because we want to accomplish these 5 things.
So I have a question about greenhouse gas emissions. Do you, when you're planning, are you accounting for the greenhouse gas emission impacts of various choices? I know that, I was somebody who weighed in a bit with my county commissioner who sat on the MPC about the necessity of having that kind of data tracked or looked at or being part of a planning decision. Could you address that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I guess we definitely are going to track it in some format. I think we did talk about it at our policy board, and I think the consensus was that this is something that we want to incorporate into this plan in some way. What that looks like will probably be determined as we kind of move through this planning process. So I definitely encourage you all to stay in the loop on it, and I'm happy to come back when we know more details or we have drafts of what those chapters look like. But I imagine there will be some tracking on it in some fashion. And then I'll just another note, of course, because we're working directly with federal agencies, that had previously been a federal performance measure under the Obama administration. It was eliminated when Trump took office. And so there is a possibility that greenhouse gas will become back as a federal performance measurement requirement. I'm not totally sure, but it is a possibility that would come back, and that sort of eliminates the choice in it. I mean, we are required to do the federal performance measures. So right now it's kind of in that gray area of up to each MPO whether they track it or not.
Ellen, I'm wondering if Vision Zero methodology is used in prioritizing decision making, and if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so some of you might know that we have a whole separate safety plan that we worked on in 2017, I believe it was adopted. And there were a lot of similarities to the Vision Zero methodology in our regional safety plan. We do have some elected officials that were not comfortable with the Vision Zero language. And so I think the final vision that we adopted was something towards working towards Vision Zero. And so I will say that that's not a completely apolitical issue for the MPO. That being said, we have a pretty strong safety culture at our MPO, and we have the Safe Lane Coalition, which has its own staff person that works directly on safety. So I imagine that will only get stronger with each iteration. And I think as some of our elected officials become more comfortable with that, I imagine it'll be a stronger part of our MPO.
And Alan, we do use it as a metric when we're looking at projects because we have our own Vision Zero plan. So as you know, we do incorporate that locally. But we're one of the few, are we the only one in the MPO that has our own Vision Zero plan?
And LTD.
Oh yeah.
Andrew's like, yep, you're the only one.
Well, no, LTD
or
does
a
not
statement.
have a plan. We have a resolution that we support that. I think, LTD as a transit operator has a slightly different position. We're obviously trying to be super safe with our buses anyway. We have a really excellent safety track record. So it's like a little different for us, not necessarily owning and building most of the infrastructure in town. But we do have a statement supporting that.
I guess one thing that I would find helpful in the document is if there's some guidance for how to, when your various priorities compete with each other, how do you resolve that? For instance, if you want to build more housing along, transit corridors, but then that also means more people get killed trying to cross the street, how do you balance that? Or if you want to, your land use policies result in housing getting so expensive that you have more homelessness, or you have your climate goals and that's going to increase congestion. So, I'd like some guidance on how you, when you can't do when you can't achieve all of your goals, how do you decide what gives?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's a little unique about the way that our projects are selected. So when we adopt this plan, there will be a list of projects that are in there, and they are specific to transportation. Although we do look at integration with land use, we're very focused on transportation. The agencies decide what they're going to apply for, and so those may be projects that are in our RTP list, or they may be new projects that are aligned with those goals but haven't been specifically listed on a map in that plan. And then we go through a consensus process with our partners to decide which projects get moved forward for funding. That goes to our policy board, and there's an opportunity for public comment during that period. And that's how we decide what projects to fund out of those federal dollars. It's a consensus based, so it is challenging. I think some years good projects don't get funded. But in general, I think most of the projects that come to the MPO for funding are pretty in line with most of the goals. There's a lot of bike ped projects, there's a lot of safety projects. And one of the reasons is because those funding sources are fairly flexible. And so the cities kind of are able to do some more innovative stuff with those dollars than they would at some of the other more constrained funding sources.
I'll just make a brief observation, which is that I've seen that the MPO really helps facilitate collaboration versus competitiveness, since there is always limited funding and limited availability to do projects. So it's great to have more people at the table and to kind of have staff working through, okay, we know we have limited funding, how can we work together? And so I think it's a really great asset and great to know more about it and be consulted. So thank you. I just wanted to make sure everyone saw that Sid put in the chat the link to the online open house. The first link is in English and the second link is in Spanish. And it'd be really great if you all could share with your networks, and if it comes up in conversation with other people, let them know that it's available. It's open through the end of February, and we are going to be raffling off some gift cards to Fred Meyer as an incentive for filling out the survey. And I'll put my email in the chat as well. I'm always available if you want to have a conversation or have questions.
Great. Well, thanks, Ellen. Sid?
Thanks for having me.
So the next item is Active Transportation Committee 2021. And this is staff.
So this is Lee, and I'm going to start. It probably won't take the 40 minutes, but what we do at the beginning of in every January, we talk about what the committee might do for the next 12 months. And so we wanted to at least start that conversation. It might move over into February. And sometimes we do the subcommittee selection, but that might happen next month. So if you look at the bottom of the agenda, there's usually the topics we want to cover in about a year. But as I look at the list, there's only one that has a date on it. And that's transportation demand management, traffic impact analysis. So next month, we're going to have Cass Casados and Larissa Varela come and talk about the TDM work, the transportation demand management work we're going to do next month. But Shane Reed and I talked a little about today. And so a lot of the things that happen at the meetings, there's kind of three things, and that kind of all came up tonight. Staff brings things that they want to impact, get some input from the committee. And sometimes the committee actually does voting. Sometimes they just provide feedback. And then there's things that come from other agencies like Lane Council of Governments or Lane Transit District. Lane County is going to do a bike master plan. They're starting this year, so that's something that might come. And then there's the 30th Avenue project to make it have better access for active transportation. And there's gonna be like a city component and a county one, so people can get to LCC better along that corridor. And so those are some of the things, bicycle parking code that might come back. So anyway, there's a bunch of things that staff wants to get input from the committee. So I'm gonna work on a draft work plan that I think are things that we wanna bring. But as I look at the list, some of them actually came from the committee itself or from the public comments, like the speed limit thing that came up tonight. There's things that do get come from the public or the committee. And so I'm going to come back with a sort of an agenda for the calendar and maybe a draft work plan. But I wanted to open it up to get input from the committee about things that you would like to do this year. And one of the things that Daniel has talked about last year was committee communication. So I want to make sure that that gets discussed a little bit. So I'd like to open it up for things that to all the members, what they'd like to work on for the next calendar year.
Well, I can start off. So last year I was on the programs subcommittee, which started off great until we ran out of the ability to do most programs. And then those of us that were remaining were able to discuss a number of things, really important planning things. But something that came up for me was kind of the relative, at least, you know, in my understanding, lack of communication outside of this particular committee. I would love to see a group of us be communicating with other bodies. So city council, you know, LTD, neighborhood associations, that sort of thing, both as a way of getting feedback and asking questions of people and soliciting their involvement, and also doing a little bit of advocacy. Because one of the great things about being on the ATC is that you know, you kind of are bridging the gap between being a citizen and being something a little more organized. So anyway, a few of us have already talked about putting that together and getting folks organized into a subcommittee, communicating with other groups. So I'd love to hear if other people are interested in that.
Daniel, so I'm certainly very interested in that, and I have a question for staff too. That in last year we kind of had a process at the beginning of the year where we sort of self-sorted into the two committees that existed at that time, which was sort of infrastructure and the programs. And as Daniel said, programs are kind of, not happening because of the COVID thing. But are we going to, are we going to have a process like that again this year? Will we sort of try to self-sort, or how are committee assignments? What are the thoughts about committee assignments in general?
I think we are going to do that maybe next month. We thought if we came together with a work plan, that might help people make a decision about what committee they want to be on.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just note is that, Reed and I can talk a little bit about, the work of those existing committees. If Reed wants to talk anything about infrastructure, I think one of the key things is that we wanted to also see what the committee's interest is, and we are definitely, you're a sounding board for us, you're advisory to staff, and so it's really helpful for us to bring things to you and to get input on that and to engage you as community members in this work. But we also want you to be engaged in a way that it's information and work that you're wanting to do as well. So it should be useful to us and useful to you. And so that's where we want to try and find that balance. I can talk a little bit about the Move Huge. The Move Huge is our active transportation strategic plan that we are wrapping up the last version of, and we need to refresh it so that we have a 2021 to 2025 active transportation strategic plan that had 63 actions in it in the last one, with goals that we are trying to reach. We have finished some of those action items. We have not reached those goals, but we definitely need to do a revisit of those goals and those actions and determine what are the things that we as staff should be focusing on. We know what we're going to be focusing on. We just created our 1-year work plan. We know some of those pieces, they're still under, they're still being adapted, but in general, we know what we're working on. But as we set these goals for the future, it's helpful for us to have an advisory committee to bounce those ideas off.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I got a couple of things that sparks, Shane. Last time we got together with the program committee, you shared an idea with us that I thought was really important. And that is the changing nature of the active transportation effort in the city. 40 years ago, it was creating a bike path that was recreational for bikers and pedestrians. And then it started to transition over time to be more, let's make bikes safe and pedestrians safe on the shared roadways. And now we're moving into a commuting sort of mindset. We look at the 13th Avenue cycle track and the Amazon cycle track. Now we're talking about biking and walking as being sort of the main way that moving toward that being our main way of commuting. I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say is, as we think about strategic planning, I think we need to be even more strategic and not sort of go around the edges, but really think about what is happening. A lot of people are coming into the city. A lot of new modes of transportation are coming into play, not just electric vehicles, but electric bikes, electric transportation, small vehicles. I think we really need to think about what is active transportation 40 years from now. Is it active or is it alternative transportation? And the other piece of this is watching Reed's presentation to the Sustainability Commission a few weeks ago, and sort of the struggle with people saying, how can we use what you're doing as metrics for what we're trying to do with greenhouse gas reduction? A lot of the work isn't talking they're not talking to each other in terms of metrics, which is a theme we've heard a couple of times. So I guess what I'm thinking is, while you're working on refining the work that's been done, there should also be maybe just a rethinking about the strategy. Do we just shut down half the streets in Eugene and say these are for tiny electric vehicles only? and bikes and pedestrians. I mean, that's radical, but instead of measuring, are we getting more bikes on the road? Maybe we should be measuring, are we getting more cars off the road? Really think about it in an entirely different way.
Alan, your hand is blending into the molding.
Yeah, thanks for recognizing me. It has been up for a little bit. I wanted just to say that I am interested in being part of the communications subcommittee if we decide to create one. And I did some looking in my email files to locate some of the communications about the communications committee that were sent around a few months ago, and I couldn't locate them. So I thought that it would be helpful, whoever initiated that, to resend them out to everyone on the committee, because we have a lot of new members, so that we'd have a better sense of what that might entail to be involved in that committee. Was it you that drafted those documents?
It was a team effort.
Team effort, okay. But you have access to them.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
If we're gonna, yeah, if we're gonna talk about it next month, then yeah, we'll definitely send that out well in advance.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I'll just respond really quick to Steve. You know, I think you bring up some good points, and it's definitely true. I think that we, you know, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to redo our active transportation strategy. We were going to be going through this year, but with COVID and just everything, it was a good time to revisit. And I think that our focus on implementing a lot of these new infrastructure projects that are really different than what we've done before are, it's an important time to think about how are we communicating about that's new infrastructure, and how do we get more people using it? And I think that, you know, these 63 actions that we had before were all really good actions. And, you know, it's hard to even think that we're not going to focus on some of them. But I think that some of them will naturally occur as we get more people using active transportation and as we change sort of how our streets are designed and people are using them in new ways. But I think that we really do have to rethink how we're the most effective in getting, you know, utilizing sort of our resources to get more butts on bikes and more feet on sidewalks and more butts in buses and more people out of single occupancy vehicles. You know, the infrastructure is a huge piece of that. But we can't let the programmatic side slide. And that's something that we have to think about. How do those mesh? And I think they mesh more now than ever because we do have these big programmatic infrastructure changes.
Looked like Sue and then Andrea.
Yeah, I don't know. Couldn't see if anyone else is
You
in
were
line.
trying to talk before.
Yeah, I too would be interested in the idea of the communications committee. I think, I mean, sure, it's great if we want to, you know, be advisory on infrastructure, but quite frankly, you guys are good. You know what you're doing. You're not going to screw up real big. I don't really worry about that. And so I guess I would look for how we can do things that the city can't do, you know, because people don't look to city sponsored things for things that are exciting or fun or, you know, changing their lives or, you know, the kind of the cultural things. And so I think there are kinds of outreach that simply can't really be done by city staff, you know, and I think that's if we can create that kind of stuff to complement the great infrastructure and programs that the city is doing to try to get more bang for the buck.
Yeah, so I totally agree with Sue. One thing that really I took away from doing the Move Huge survey was there were 63 items. There was a lot to work on. And, you know, and the programs committee, I mean, I was excited to work on it. And of course, COVID sort of, you know, ended that very quickly. And what really came across to me was that we are really trying to work on behavior change, and doing events, as we were doing with programs, are great, but they don't necessarily really encourage people over time to continue, to have different behavior. And what also occurred to me about the Move Huge survey was that there were just so many items, and I felt like we aren't really taking advantage of ways to create better partnerships and allies in the community to get education and messaging out. So I think the communications committee could really take on that role, to really build some partnerships and allies, with climate groups and other, groups that really want better transportation.
If I may add to what Shane was saying about encouraging more people to ride bicycles, COVID has had its downside, but one upside that I read about is that people are riding more bicycles, and bike shops at one time didn't have enough bicycles to sell to the people. So how can we use this information to reach out to these people?
Grace and Andrew.
I'm really excited about thinking about how we can build more collaboration and what we can do as individual ATC members kind of in between meetings. I know we're all busy individuals and we have a limited capacity, but I think thinking about how we can strategically connect with other groups and other community members to kind of spread the message that we're trying to cultivate here is a great idea. I'm also really supportive of the idea of having a work plan so we can have some more clearly delineated focuses. I think giving people, and myself included, a marching order makes it a lot easier to get things done versus just having a lot of ideas and conversations.
I'm curious about the timeline for the update to Move Huge. You said 21 to 25, and it's 21 now. So I'm curious, when we're going to be super engaged in that. And I'll just note, I think it's super important, actually, that we move quickly on that. And I think that programs, even though we can't do them now, are going to become super important once we can. And I say that because kind of the best research I've ever seen shows that there are only a few times in people's lives that you can really make a lasting change. Kind of getting it to Sunday streets might get you to ride your bike for a weekend, but it doesn't get you to ride your bike to work all year. So those things are usually like having a baby, moving, changing jobs. And it's not in the research, but I'm willing to bet that COVID counts, right? If you work from home for a year, your commute has just been completely disrupted, and we have a chance to really get people to try something. And if they get in the habit of that, it takes a couple weeks, but that's all it takes. And then they're in the habit of it, and they'll keep doing it until, one of those events kind of breaks the habit. So I think we have a real opportunity, and I'm curious what our timeline on the strategic plan is, because I think that this group, but all of us broadly in this community have a real opportunity to grow that. And like Papa said, a ton of people bought bikes. And if we can get them to start riding that to work, we can really move that needle on the commute data that we're always talking about.
Yeah, just real quick, my timeline is to move pretty quick on it because it is something that, affects our work now. And, the previous report, the previous iteration was supposed to take us into 2021. But I felt that this was the prime time to do this. And so I'm working on it now, working on the evaluation of what we've done and how that might affect what we do in the future. And so the next few months with ATC will be an important sort of feedback time on what we're doing next.
Reed, did you have a hand? Then Pete, I think. Am I missing anyone?
Yeah, I did. So for folks who were with us at the last iteration of the committee, they were talking about a program subcommittee and an infrastructure subcommittee. And since the beginning of this, and it used to be called the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, or BPAC, we've always sort of divided folks up into these different subcommittee areas. And there used to be a lot of them, like we've had many of them working on specific projects. And what it boiled down to is that there seemed to be more programmatic things, like we're going to tell people about stuff, or we're going to put up some signs and that kind of thing. Or there's infrastructure, we're going to go build something. But what I've noticed over the past couple of years since we just started doing this sort of binary is that those little projects matter a lot more and tend to create a lot more enthusiasm. And so one of the reasons we're not assigning subcommittees tonight is because we want to give this ATC work plan a little bit of time to mature, to grow, to get put together, and for you to say, I have a lot of energy around that thing, whatever that thing is. And if there's another person that says, I do too, then we have a subcommittee because we got two of you who are really excited about something, and we would like to provide you with the resource to be successful in that. So that's how we want to spend our time as staff, not convening folks so that we have to talk about something, but assisting you if you are really excited about something to be successful in whatever that thing is. So the time we're using right now is really to generate ideas of like how we could do some of that stuff and what those topics are. And what Lee's going to bring back in February is going to be a list of that stuff, and hopefully we can share it before the meeting. So you have some time to pore over that and say, man, I really wish we had better path etiquette signage or something. And then we can sort of focus on that and self-identify and say, that is what I want to work on too, instead of us arbitrarily putting you into a category that doesn't necessarily fit your interest. So we're trying to do this a little bit differently, but it's going to depend on you. So, you know, we might end up with a single subcommittee or a bunch, and we're just going to see how this thing shakes out. But it's going to be based on what you're willing to give outside of the regular committee meeting. And so weigh that carefully, because things won't go if you don't have time to commit to them. And let's be realistic with what our expectations are. The reason some of these things haven't been done is because they do take some time. So I just want to provide that caveat too, but I want you to get excited. I want you to work on things that you want to work on. And I want you to have access to the people who can help you succeed. So that's what we're trying to get out of this year.
So I've been listening to everybody and thinking about what this year is going to be kind of start looking like. You know, right now we're kind of still in the depths of kind of everybody being kind of a little bit more sequestered. People are working from home. There's less traffic. I mean, downtown where I live is very quiet compared to what it was before. Basically a year ago when people were, you know, there wasn't enough parking. Now there's too much parking and all that. But what I think what is going to be interesting is what's going to happen is we're going to begin to come out of this pandemic and start having, you know, when the vaccines really start kicking in, and people are going to be a little bit more open, hopefully sometime this summer. And I think there's an incredible opportunity there to do what was earlier pointed out is changing people's patterns and talking to people about, hey, you know, now that you've been sequestered away, maybe you're commuting, maybe you're not, but you know, now's the time to think about different ways of doing things. So I think there's an incredible opportunity, and I don't want to miss it. And for however we do with the committees, if we're talking about a program of getting things out, I think there's a crucial opportunity in around that summertime when I think the world is going to be a little bit open up quite a bit more, and we have an opportunity to, as a committee, really advocate for active transportation at that point and hopefully get some messaging out. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah, and I'd just sort of like to, sort of echo some of what Steve and Andrew were saying, that maybe we should be thinking beyond bikes and pedestrians and transit, and maybe look at some of these other things that have exploded during COVID, like skateboarding, unicycles have gone out of stock too. People are using all these weird sort of crazy new small ways to get around that still count as active transportation, but are maybe not legitimized in the city. So for instance, a skateboarder can't use the 13th Street bikeway because they're not recognized as transport. But you know, it's as Pete was saying, as we come out of this in the summer, maybe, you know, say, okay, maybe you don't like biking, but maybe you like, you know, rollerblading or something. Is there a way we can incorporate some of these different, maybe funkier modes into getting people to commute outside of a car?
If I could jump in.
Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, I've heard a lot of good things. I've really enjoyed the conversation here. I think the communication piece is really important. I think that it could go in a lot of different directions, a lot of different levels. That would be something really good to flesh out. I think there, as an active transportation committee, I think we tend to focus on, it seems to me, I could be wrong, but, you know, bicycling. And I think that I really want to think about pedestrians as well, because I feel like they're our most vulnerable users. And I always feel like a city that takes care of the most vulnerable first is a city that I want to be a part of. And so, and I think that it builds from there. That's my personal opinion, is really working on pedestrian issues. And I'm glad to have Pete here, who's a big pedestrian. I think that really makes us strong. I agree with jumping on the changes that have been brought about by COVID, because I think we're going to go slipping right back into where we were if it's not jumped on. I believe in getting tougher on the cars, like Steve said. Maybe there's that whole thing in transportation about making it less convenient for cars and more convenient for walkers and bikers. And I think that's just critical. And so, like, to Andrew's point, was it Andrew who put in a comment there about, I don't know if you guys got a chance to read it, about he really likes the safety of 13th Street, which is true. And I understand that was their priority, but of course we all know that we also have to make it convenient or people aren't going to use it. So it has to be both, you know, it has to be safe and it has to go smoothly. So that's a really big thing. And then I've also just been doing some reading. Last thing is, I can't remember, it was really worded better than I'm going to do it, but it's just like asking people to walk and bike and take the bus. You know, it's like all these suggestions and these enticements, and do we ever have the mayor and whoever, all of us, actually asking people, hey, will you ride your bike and will you walk and will you take the bus? It's like just asking them to, because it's an important thing that we need to do.
I heard a couple of people talk. Sue said something about the ATC members being able to do and say things that maybe staff can't. I heard Grace and Steve talk about maybe being more strategic in how we're doing. I'm curious, not to call you out specifically, what all those thoughts are. Another thought that I'm having is there's lots of great ideas here. I'm wondering if anyone has ideas about how these could coalesce into projects or committees.
This is more in the line of mechanism than project or committee, but one thing I've noticed for me would be extremely helpful would be to have a repository for best practices or demonstrated ideas. I don't really see where that exists. I may be missing it. I know I'm also in a electric vehicle group, and I share, everybody wants to be a part, they all want to talk about cars and I want to talk about bikes, but having a Facebook page gives me a place to put research and best practices from around the world. I'm wondering if we have some place like that where we can share either academic research or even just, simple best practices.
And I'm a total nerd, but I also think it'd be really fun to do like a book study a book group. Something voluntary. There's that book, Copenhagen Ice. Have you guys read that one, anybody? Is that a good one?
Well, I don't need to do an editorial on Copenhagen Eyes, but there's sort of a right way to do things, and that's the Copenhagen way, and then there's everything else. So, read it with a grain of salt.
Maybe a little more intersectional. I just read Right of Way. I thought it was wonderful. I saw Sue. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is off the book club topic, but one sort of project that I've always been interested in is if we could just identify a bunch of different community leaders, not necessarily, or certainly not elected officials, or but people who people respect. Our version of Anthony Fauci, for one guy, for one thing, and just try to talk with them about getting out on bikes and taking pictures of them being on, get some of these people that people like to emulate, and get them riding bikes and see if they can talk it up among their groups. It's I've always envisioned posters on the side of LTD buses of it used to be Sabrina Ionescu riding her bike to school, or people who are community leaders already, and kind of ride along with them. But a lot of them probably already do ride bikes somewhat, but that's not what they're known for. But that's kind of the key, incorporate it into, you don't have to be a bicyclist. It's just a sensible way to get around, and it's really fun. And look at these cool people who are doing it.
Yeah, Anne?
So these are great ideas. It's exciting to hear all of them. I'm also interested in thinking about how we could engage potentially college students, for example. There's great research in the travel behavior literature that, like Andrew cited, about life cycles and when's a good time to change travel behavior. But there's also research that shows if you do a travel behavior when young, you're more likely to continue doing it when you're older. And so if we can invest in children up through college, and especially people who, if you think they're moving to Eugene, maybe they're staying, maybe they're going elsewhere, but that's a great thing if they bike in other communities too, or walk. Moving is also a really good inflection point for when people reassess how they're traveling. And so I feel like, can we identify different groups as well, that maybe it's outreach, maybe there's some partnership like with Hillary with Safe Routes to School, but thinking about also the long term and investing in kind of next gen.
I'll just mention really quick on that note that we do have a Smart Trips program. Traditionally, we've done our Smart Trips program in neighborhoods, and we have funding coming in 2022 for a Smart Trips New Movers program. So people who are at that inflection point and are moving, it is a great time to make that new transportation choice. And so that's one of the things that will definitely be in our strategy, because we have funding for it. And then around the University of Oregon, I'm working with Josh on a large employer program.
Shane, can I ask, how do you identify new movers?
So you can actually get mailing lists. They're actually lists that you can buy when people put in their change of address. And so you can do it that way. We also have talked about how incorporating low-income housing, and we have several new low-income housing. And so all those people, as they move into any new housing development, a big chunk.
Alan, then Grace.
Yeah, all the city and county policies over the last couple of decades to reduce VMT hasn't been as effective as COVID in reducing automobile use. And we know that one of the reasons people are most hesitant about bicycling and walking is the threat of automobiles. And so I want to take up more on this thread that several people like Andrew have mentioned, that there is a real opportunity here. And I think that there's probably people who are asking these questions, maybe like Nico Larco at the university, and others who are questioning how we can encourage things like the Zoom meeting that we're on to continue, and other kinds of things that people have already adapted to create new kinds of policies that may look very different than what we have been looking at, and look more like transportation demand management than infrastructure or programs. So to Reed's point of like, how can you help us? It would be to figure out who are the people out there that are doing the thinking and the research like right now, because we have this window of opportunity, and get us that information so that we can start putting our heads together and making recommendations to the city so that we're prepared.
I was just going to pick up on a couple of threads that have already been mentioned. I really love the idea of having a more robust collaboration and communication space for ourselves in between meetings, whether it's a Facebook group or more emails or something along those lines. And then I think it's not too soon to start planning for shared and open streets in 2021. I mean, it's already, we had a glorious sunny day today, twice this week already. So I think we should start pressuring the city if we can to close those streets down and open them up for walking and biking.
Well, that's a good example of how I think, you know, it would be great to hear your feedback, and that's going to be one of the pieces that we're going to need to discuss, because, you know, I can say with some certainty that Sunday Streets is not going to happen this year. There's just too much uncertainty to plan an event like that again this summer. And then it becomes a question of, is that programming the best way to reach the goals that we're trying to reach? And I think that, you know, Sunday Streets is a beloved program, and I love it. And it's, you know, is an integral part of my work and the work that we've done with transportation options here in Eugene. But is it the best thing? Is it the best bang for our buck for what we're trying to do? And I think now is the time for that conversation. Or are these different times, and the way that we're coming out of them are going to be really different? And, you know, I think when we look at what we're doing at the city, it's really different as well. And so I think it's going to be a good time to reevaluate that. I think open streets is another one that I think we're going to need to have some discussion on of, is that effective for our community and what we want to achieve? Is it the best use of staff and community volunteer and general resources? Is that going to help us get there? If so, great. You know, let's do it. But I think this committee is going to be an important part of that discussion.
I love all these discussions. It's very exciting to hear a lot of energy behind them. And I think something that we've been talking about at Safe Routes is how to get people, especially thinking about if kids start going back in hybrid, not to drive to school. Because if people don't feel comfortable sending their kids on the bus, then that's going to be a lot of single occupancy vehicles, a lot of traffic around schools, a lot more pollution, a lot less safe, especially with a lot of kids crossing. And so having programs already in place before kids go back to hybrid, and thinking about everybody going back to work, and thinking about how can you get things into place beforehand. So, so we've been thinking a lot about walking school buses, and then having partnerships with people ahead of time. So I'm just throwing that out there in the mix. And I'm wondering if there's other things like bike trains or other ways to get people who work downtown, maybe group them together to get incentivized. Because I think a lot of the times, if you're going to be walking or biking, you really have to prepare and almost have an incentive or somebody counting on you to get you started off into a new habit. And so maybe thinking about how we can connect people, that also might be an option.
Vicky had a great related idea here, going to businesses to offer employee routes to use when they come back to work physically. So to give that connection when they make that change.
I have kind of a crazy fun idea, and that would be to map out an alternative way for each of our city councilors to get to a city council meeting once they can go back in person, if they had to walk or bus or bike it, and encourage them to give it a try, and report back how it went. Because, you know, if it's easy to do, we know their addresses, and so we can easily say, well, you can catch a number thing bus and you'll have to catch it here if you're going to get to the council meeting by so and so, and if you walk it's going to take you this long, and here's your bike route. And just as an educational exercise, I think it would be fun for them to see what it's like to not just walk in somebody, you know, instead of ride in somebody else's car, walk in somebody else's shoes, you know, ride on somebody else's bus. But I think it could be kind of a fun, lighthearted way to make a point.
Especially if you can publicize it somehow.
Well, yes.
I don't know if this keeping the dialogue open right now is good, if we have, but if we want to get some clarity around different committees for how we might structure ourselves, that could be, you know, like 4 of us getting together and saying, what do you think? You know, here's one way we could structure ourselves, and then coming back and sharing, you know, to get some different structural.
You're losing you there,
Yeah, I'm
Mary.
afraid we didn't get that.
You were breaking up a whole lot, and then
It's one possible way to go forward.
Mary,
Okay, I think, yeah, I've got an
if you can type what you just said, I'm sure we would love to read it.
If I get lost again, I'll put it in chat, because I think my connection is not very stable right now. So what I said, should I repeat? Or I don't know how much you heard. I'll put it in chat.
Please do. So we only have a few minutes left for our last item. So maybe we can just any other urgent things and then we can move on. Great. So the last agenda item is project updates and information share. So do we have any project updates?
I have an assignment for you guys, and it's if you want to. What we're doing is we're trying to work with the utility companies, and what they're doing is when they drill a hole, they put some cold patch asphalt back over it, and it makes the road really lumpy. And we want to document examples of where they haven't done a good job of that, because they insist that they are, and I don't think that they are. So if you find a patch somewhere and you can take a picture of it and just email that to me or to Lee with like the location where it's at, we can start to assemble those and say, okay, this is not an imminent pavement project where you could put something back sloppy. This was just done and you have ruined what is otherwise a really smooth street sort of thing. So just as it occurs to you, if you hit something and like lose your drink or something, take a picture of that because we don't want that to happen.
And I think, Reed, we probably have some infrastructure project updates that we could send via an email to just kind of give folks an update on those, or make sure that they're in motion next month, because there are definitely a good amount of infrastructure projects coming, but I think it would take too much time to go over where some of those are right now. I will share that on the program side that we are still in the RFP process for the bike share operator. We had 3 really great applications. We did an interview with one of those applicants and are doing some sort of behind the scenes number crunching and decision making with leadership to figure out our next steps. We hope to move forward as soon as we can and get a contract in place and start that transition so that we're ready in March or April for them to take over. I'm really excited about them, and hopefully next month I'll have some big news.
Okay, and then we have a few minutes for anyone who has any information, other events or things going on that you'd like to share with the group.
I just wanted to give kudos to Reed and staff for, I got out on one of these beautiful days a couple of days ago for a nice tour of all the new footings and conduit and bolts that are up on the West Amazon path. And it's beautiful work. I can't wait to see the light standards go in. It's going to look really, really nice. Not West Amazon, on the West Riverbank path.
Andrew,
I was just going to note that LTD is increasing service again at the end of the month. I think on the 24th, but you should look it up if you take the bus a lot. And in addition to that, the customer service center downtown is open again. LTD is going to start collecting fares on February 1st. We've been fare free for probably since April, but you're going to have to do fares again. But the cool thing is if you use the Touch Pass system or you want to go get a card, the month of February is going to be free for people who use that to encourage people to use the Touch Pass system, which is the electronic fares.
I'll comment. I'm on the street repair review panel. I believe Sue is still on that as well. That is a citizen committee that meets just 3 times a year to review the work that's been done as a result of the bond levy that was passed a number of years ago for street repair. It also funds a good chunk of the bicycle infrastructure projects. And it meets only 3 times a year in the winter to review what happened the last year and to look forward to what's coming up in future years. So if you have any questions about either what's happened in the past or what might come up in the future, please talk with me, and I can make any kind of connections or try to answer any questions. In particular, the one thing that I'm curious about that is relevant to our committee is whether we've seen any reduction of the use or the wear of roads as a result of fewer people driving, and whether there might be any kind of reallocation of funding potentially as a result of that.
I would also add that that committee, we theoretically, I've never quite mastered it, but we're supposed to be the experts on why roads get fixed, in what order they get fixed in, and why certain streets are repaired in a certain way and that sort of stuff. And there's a lot to it. And I'm constantly hearing people saying, I don't know why they did that, or I don't know why, it's sort of like, I do. So it's kind of a good rep, and feel free to ask me, because then that'll make me get my act together and figure out what the answer is.
I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, I read on KEZI that on January 1st, someone killed somebody else with their car at 7 p.m. on River Road, just outside Beltline. The report based on the police report was basically implicitly forgave the driver and blamed the pedestrian. They said there was no indication that the driver was impaired, only inclement weather and dark conditions. Meanwhile, they said the pedestrian was wearing non-contrasting clothing. They didn't talk about the design of River Road. They didn't talk about the fact that it encourages speed or any other things that might be done about it. And I just wanted to share this because it's something I've been trying to be more aware of recently. And it's the reason why I'm here, because these things are horrible and completely preventable.
Thanks, Daniel, for sharing that. And I want to just take a quick second to thank all the new members of the ATC and thank all of you for the time that you commit to the ATC. We got some really great information tonight, and I really look forward to working with you all on committees and on subcommittees.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. It was really exciting to hear all the new voices and hear what everyone's excited about. And we really need to figure out a way of getting into committees. Yeah, I might send emails about that. I thought I saw there was a lot of comments in the chat I didn't see, but we should definitely make something happen.
That'll be an agenda item in February. But folks right now should be thinking about unique projects that they want to work on. And we'll record that in February.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all. Have a great night.